I want to thank the Open Society Foundations and the United Cities and Local Governments World Secretariat for the invitation and the opportunity to hear some of the very interesting presentations of these 3 days. Um, it, I think it's very important that we set a timeline for making these very fundamental, very transformative changes, as the previous moderator mentioned. 2045 is too long for me. I'll be 100 then, but it's still a reachable goal. And we have some elements that we can start working on. First, I think in the case of mental health treatment, we do have a new changing normative landscape with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that very significantly prohibits non-consensual incarceration and even restraints. And of course, there's a lot of ground to be covered to get that implemented worldwide, but it is a very important normative start. But I also think in terms of mandatory preventive detention, which is a scourge of our prisons and our justice systems around the world, we do have the very authoritative interpretation by the Human Rights Committee about Article 7 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that already long ago said that preventive detention should be the exception and not the norm. But we need to expand the meaning of this pronunciation, and particularly to reduce the discretion of states to determine which offenses merit preventive detention and which merit release on bail pending trial. I think it's important that we start thinking through and providing standards on what are the valid reasons to deny bail. And first, I think we should insist not only on bail, but on other alternatives to incarceration, particularly pending trial, but also alternatives to sentencing as well. In terms of the reasons to deny bail, some of the common sense ones would be first a case of repeat offender or recidivism, or second, if the person has jumped bail and has tried to abscond. Third, when there's multiple offenders and there is a fear that the investigation will be jeopardized because of the early release of someone who can tell others, accomplices, outside what the investigation is about. But even at that, in cases like that, it should be strictly limited in time and carefully monitored by judges. The most important thing, I think, is to ban completely this notion of dangerousness, which is something, I mean, explicitly it has been banned in criminal law now for almost 100 years. But implicitly, a lot of this scourge of preventive detention is based on some supposed dangerousness of a person who has not been tried, has not been prosecuted, has not lost his or her presumption of innocence, and therefore strict norms and standards to ban the use of dangerousness, whether it's invoked or it's implied, is something that we can and we should do, and as soon as possible. I think we can do it by getting more authoritative interpretations by treaty bodies, by regional courts, by regional commissions, by special rapporteurs and working groups whose influence on the evolution of standards can be important. But I think, quite frankly, in the end, what we're up against is a battle for the hearts and minds of citizens. In many countries, this pressure for mandatory sentencing and for mandatory preventive detention stems from a public that is completely inundated with information and threatening, visions of crime rampant in the street. And we have to recognize that that crime has to be stopped. We also have to be able to convince people that the better way to fight crime is not with punitive doctrines like the ones we've been hearing about, but that a much better way of dealing with crime is with alternatives to incarceration, with alternatives to preventive detention, and particularly with alternatives to sentencing as well. Again, there's a lot of work to be done, and I don't have the magic solution, but I think the ideas that have been exposed in these 3 days should be a very good basis to start a campaign for the public opinion, but also for policymakers to convince institutions and states that there's a much better way to fight crime than the resort to punitivism and massive incarceration. Thank you very much again for the opportunity.